everyone and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Katarina. I am really excited about today's video. As you can see from the title, it is a Pan Those Eyeshadows update, but also I have now decided what my next year's Pan That palette is going to be, and I will start prepping the palette for the project. So I'm so excited to share that with you. However, before getting any further into the video, I want to say that I am filming on May 31st. I always try to film on the last day of the month. However, my computer was away for a couple of weeks because the screen broke and I wasn't able to edit videos during that time. And I do have one wardrobe video that I filmed earlier that I want to edit and upload before this one. But I will try to get both of them up as soon as possible. So yeah, now that that's out of the way, let's get into the video. So the way my Pan Those eyeshadows go right now is that from all of my 5 eyeshadow palettes, I randomize one eyeshadow and my goal is to use the eyeshadow for 10 times. But now it's going to change with one of the palettes because it's going to be my next year's Pan That palette, and that is the Juvia's Place the Nubian 2 eyeshadow palette. So first I will say that from this palette I was working on the shade Cleopatra, or I was supposed to be working on it, but I didn't wear it at all in May. It's just not the season when I would reach into a bright blue like this. This kind of shade I might sneak into a look in later summer when I do have like a really proper tan, and then also in fall time. However, let's talk about this palette a little bit. It's going to be my next year's Pan That palette. The reason I want to make this my Pan That palette is that this is my oldest pre-made eyeshadow palette right now in my collection. I do have some singles that are older than this, but this one I bought back in 2018, and in 2018, in 2019, what came to the color story and the formula, this really was one of my favorite palettes in my entire collection. And honestly, now I wish that I got a little bit more use out of this back then, but that was also when I started doing Pan That palette for the first time, so I was really focused on doing my Pan That palette, and this palette didn't get love as much as it deserved. But my makeup style has changed now quite a bit. I rarely go for bolder looks anymore, like the eyeshadow look I'm wearing right now. So this to me is pretty much only filming makeup. So while I do think this palette is absolutely beautiful, I do think this palette doesn't really represent my style that well anymore. And I wish I got better use out of it when it did, because I feel this was so much me back in 2018, 2019, when I was more into strong eyeshadow looks, playing with makeup, being creative. So what I'm going to do with this palette now is that for the next 6 months, I'm going to pick 2 shades each month, and my goal is to use the eyeshadow. I don't necessarily know if I want to have a usage goal, but enough times to know if I want to have that eyeshadow in my Pan That palette next year. Those shades that I do not like, do not represent my style, that I feel are not wearable on my everyday, I'm just going to crush the eyeshadows. I would rather want to have a palette with shades that realistically I can use on my daily basis. So yeah, for the next 6 months I will be having in my color story 2 eyeshadows from this palette, and I will actually hand pick them because I want to give these eyeshadows as fair shot as I possibly can. So I want to pick eyeshadows that go with each other, but also that I do think are seasonally appropriate. So for example, if I got the shade Cleopatra right now, I would declutter it for sure. I'm still 99% sure that I'm going to declutter it whenever I will use it, but at least I want to give it a fair shot and pick it during a season when I would be more likely to reach for a shade like that. The next 6 months are going to be from June through November, and then in December I'm going to take a complete break with this palette because then we are going to pan it in 2025. But yeah, let's talk about the shades that I'm going to pick for the month of June, and I have decided to go for Jezebel over here and Suri. So the shades are next to each other. Jezebel is a matte kind of like burgundy shade. Then Suri I had in this project previously, so I have hit pan on that. That is kind of like a neutral champagne toned shade. I feel it is a little bit more cool toned to the rest of the palette. So there you go with those swatches. So yeah, for June I wanted to pick these shades because I think June is a month that I'm still into this kind of makeup, like we're talking about berries, pinks. I don't always wear them myself because I feel it's just for me really difficult to pull off those colors, but I kind of do think about those colors as the first half of the year colors, and for me Jezebel is a color like that. And then once we get to July and the second half of the year is when I think of golds, browns, coppers, rustic tones. So yeah, that's why it makes sense for me to pick this eyeshadow for June. Then Suri, it's just great shade I think in any season, but in summer I tend to be more into really light makeup, specifically during daytime. Actually right now I am not even wearing eyeshadow on my daily basis, but I might still do an inner corner highlighter, so Suri good work for that. But yeah, these eyeshadows are now going to be in my color palette for June. Okay, but let's continue with the Pan Those Eyeshadows update. I will show you first the color story that I got for May, and actually all of the shades were randomized in the last update because the previous month was so good that I hit my goal with all of the shades with the exception of one that I declutter. Cleopatra we talked about already, but let's talk about the rest of the shades. The eyeshadow that I do have from my singles palette in this project is this green eyeshadow over here. It is Jester from Makeup Geek. There's not much progress there. I have used the eyeshadow twice in May, today being the second day, and today I am wearing it on my lower lash line. I wanted to sneak it there for the sake of this update. It is for me kind of like difficult to reach for. I don't go for these often, although I will say if there is a color that I like on myself, it is an olive green like this. But yeah, it's just one of those that I reach for it more rarely. Oh, I almost forgot that in May I was actually able to hit a bonus pan on this palette and finish an eyeshadow. So let's talk about the empty first because I have already removed the pan from the palette. So I was able to finish my KVD, this was the shade Latinus. It is depotted from the KVD Shade and Light Eye Contour palette, and this eyeshadow was a really light peach. Sometimes I used it as a blush. It would be on me like a really nudish peach blush, but I also used it a lot of the times to like put on eyeshadow primer and then set the primer with this eyeshadow and then put on mascara and call that my eyeshadow look of the day. That's actually something that I do quite often if I'm not in a hurry. If I am in a hurry, I'm not going to do that, but if I have a little bit more time, I like to do that because I do have extremely oily and hooded eyelids. So if I don't do that, there will be some creasing, like if concealer or foundation ends up there, it will crease if I don't put eyeshadow primer and set it with something. So yeah, that's the way I used this eyeshadow, and I'm happy to have it out now. I bought the KVD Shade and Light Eye Contour palette from a trip to Canary Islands back in 2015, so the palette was old, so I don't have any eyeshadows from there anymore, and maybe it's a good thing because it was so old. But then I did hit one bonus pan in the month of May, and the shade is this one. There we go. So that is Devilish Daniel, depotted from the Balm Shady Lady Special Edition palette, I think it's called. Another really old palette. This eyeshadow is something that I do like it as a lid shade, but then also I do like it as an inner corner highlighter, and in fact I am wearing it as an inner corner highlighter today. So yeah, happy to make progress with this eyeshadow because it is old, but it is really beautiful. It's satin finish, and that's something that I do often like. Specifically if I go for a really light shade on the lid, I don't like to go in with something super metallic necessarily. I would rather have a matte or a satin. But yeah, as you can see, even if I don't necessarily have the goal of hitting pan on an eyeshadow in my Pan Those Eyeshadows, my collection is at the point where it still happens, and I'm so happy for that. Okay, so next is the Huda Beauty Gold Obsessions eyeshadow palette. From this palette I was working on the second shade. So this one over here, and it is a really light skin tone-ish peach. So this shade actually is really similar to the KVD Latinus shade, and I actually also wore them similarly. The KVD eyeshadow I just wore as a blush because I really wanted to finish it. This one I have not worn as a blush because I kind of don't want to waste it. But yeah, I have mainly worn it so that I do put on eyeshadow primer and I set it with this and call it a day. But also sometimes I do use it as a blending shade. This eyeshadow I have now used 11 times in this project, meaning that it will roll out and we will be rolling in something new from this palette. And yeah, from this palette in April I decided to declutter the 9th shade. As you can see now, the pan is all empty. It was a really chunky yellow gold that I just really hated. And then another Huda Beauty palette I have is the Toffee Brown Obsessions. From this palette I was working on the 6th shade over here. So there is a dent starting to form on that eyeshadow. I have not hit pan yet, but these eyeshadows are not deep, so I don't think the pan is far away. But I actually used this eyeshadow for 10 times, so it is time to roll that eyeshadow out and roll in something new to replace this one. And I'm actually wearing this today all over my lid. So today I wanted to wear this eyeshadow to get the 10 uses up so that we can have a reroll on this palette too. This is a beautiful shade. It is kind of like a bronzy metallic shade. I think these Huda Beauty shimmers are something that I have started to appreciate more now. I can wear them in a more subtle way and not have them being so blingy. So if I blend them a little bit more, they will be kind of like a standard shimmer, but then if I wear them with a glitter primer, for example, it's going to be really blingy. That's just typically not my eyeshadow style, but yeah, I do really enjoy this formula. Some of her shades for sure are more chunky, and that's not necessarily something that I enjoy, but this eyeshadow at least is really, really beautiful. And then the last eyeshadow that I have in this project is Bronze from ABH Soft Glam. On the pan, this eyeshadow looks like straight up gold, but now that I rolled it into this project, I actually do understand why it's gold bronze, although I do still think this is kind of like a darker gold, but it is clearly darker. But yeah, this eyeshadow is something that in fall and in winter I would enjoy it as a lid shade, but I think this time of the year, if I wear it as an all-over lid shade, which I tried once like that, the look is going to be too heavy. So I have worn bronze 3 times in May, and one of the times it was that little bit kind of like heavier look when it was my all over the lid shade, but then the other times I had it on the outer half of my lid and then something lighter on the inner half of the lid. But yeah, I will quickly mention about my pan percentage that it has changed really slightly, but I didn't now check it before I started filming this. But because I finished one eyeshadow that had pan already and then I hit one new pan, the amount of pan didn't change in my collection, but the amount of eyeshadows in my collection changed, so the change is really small. But yeah, I will now post to the screen what my current numbers are. And then let's get into the exciting part, so rolling in new eyeshadows, and this time I will be rolling new eyeshadows from both of the Huda Beauty palettes. And as I said, my goal is 10 uses with the eyeshadows in this project right now, and honestly, when I changed the eyeshadow to be 10 uses, since then I have been so much happier with my looks, because I don't have that pressure anymore to make progress. It's just about having fun and rotating through things and enjoying everything. I don't say I was wasteful before, but I went for looks stronger what I wanted to go. But yeah, let's roll in new eyeshadows from the Huda Beauty palettes. So first the Gold Obsessions. As you saw from this palette, I did declutter one eyeshadow, so I do have in my pretty random app numbers from 1 through 8. Even if I get the same shade I got last time, I think I'm still going to choose it and go for it. But if I get something too similar to something else that I'm already working on, I think 10 I'm going to reroll. So we'll see what we get. 7. Ooh, okay, so we got this shade over here. This one I think is the most cool toned shade. I'm sorry, the camera is not focused. There, I think you go. This I think is the most cool toned shade. I wish I got this a little bit earlier this year, to be completely honest. It is kind of like, let me swatch it. Sometimes these eyeshadows, when you swatch them, they actually look really different than what they look like on the pan. Okay, yes, this is kind of like a frosty eyeshadow. I'm going to show you a close-up of the swatches once I have randomized the last shade. But then we do have the Huda Beauty Toffee Brown Obsessions, and in this palette there is 9 shades left, but I have hit pan on one of them, so I don't want to randomize that. So I'm again going to randomize from 1 through 8. Number 3. So over here, it is a matte, kind of like reddish mid-toned brown. This shade actually has been in this project previously in January, but I don't mind. It is a really useful shade, kind of like a deepening shade for me. Let me show you this color story. Let's start from here. I do have Jezebel and Suri from the Julia's Place. Then here's Jester from Makeup Geek, Bronze from the ABH palette, and then there is the kind of like pinky frosty shade from Huda Beauty, and then the matte. So those are the shades that I will be focusing on right now in June. The Juvia's Place eyeshadows, I will try my hardest to get the 10 uses up with this kind of like frostier Huda Beauty shade. But yeah, that is everything for this update. I know this was a little bit longer one. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you on my next one. Bye bye.